Welcome to the Meez podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
My guest today is Vojtech Vegh, a Slovakian-born chef dedicating his career to the pursuit of zero-waste plant-based cooking. I'll be honest, I had a very different perception of how this conversation would go going into it, and I was pleasantly surprised at Vojtech's ability to be simultaneously pragmatic while still upholding this almost maniacal approach to reducing food waste and still making really delicious food. He's the author of the book Surplus, the Food Waste Guide for Chefs, and now he devotes his time to helping restaurants around the world implement this zero-waste tactics into their daily operations. One of my favorite little tidbits from the conversation was when we dive into what he calls the black truffle mindset. So Vojtech, if we treat every ingredient with the care and respect that we treat black truffles, the outcome will inevitably be less waste. I couldn't agree more, but I also think that treating every ingredient this way is how we make better, more thoughtful, less fussy, more delicious food in general. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Vojtech, welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
Good to see you, man. We haven't caught up in a while.
Good to be here.
Yeah, I think maybe just to kick everybody off, there's a lot of chefs, restaurant owners, things like that listening, among other people. So maybe, if you don't mind, just give me a quick background on yourself, how you came to be, and what you're doing now.
Basically, a zero waste and a plant-based chef. I've been working in professional kitchens around the world for past, now it's been like 12 years. And then I have also opened my own restaurant, which happened to be the first vegan and zero waste restaurant in the world. That was in Cambodia back in 2018. And since then, I wrote a book for chefs, the Food Waste Guide for Chefs, which is used by many chefs at this point. Yeah, right now I'm doing workshops, chefs training, private cooking, and just spreading the word around food waste and what we can do as chefs.
It's awesome, man. I wanted to ask you, because I think I didn't ask you before, why'd you go to Cambodia to open a restaurant?
I used to travel to Southeast Asia a lot, like a backpacker when I was younger, and I kind of fell in love with that place. When I was in Siem Reap is a town in Cambodia where I had my restaurant. And then I was comparing all these countries around the Southeast Asia, like, what would be like a good place for the restaurant? And then I arrived to Siem Reap and I was like, oh my God, like that's amazing. Like there was such a tightly knit community of local business owners, and there's so many initiatives about waste reducing and local activities in all that thing. And I was like, I love that. And that would be like a perfect part of the local community, that restaurant. So I decided that I want to be here and do that.
Did you use a lot of Cambodian flavors, or what was like the style of the restaurant? I know it was vegan.
Wasn't really going to do like Cambodian cooking. I don't think I'm qualified to do Cambodian cooking. There is much better local chefs. I stick to my, what I call like modern European cooking. Local ingredients all the time, but the style of the food, I'd say, like Central European kind of thing.
Why vegan food? Why'd you start doing that?
It wasn't supposed to be vegan initially. Always was to be zero waste. That was clear that it has to be like as zero waste as possible. But vegan just happened because of the unavailability of high quality meat and other animal products in Cambodia. It was impossible to source anything local. Organic is non-existent in Cambodia. Local, you're lucky to get something local. So I ended up like considering like, okay, I can serve like eggs. That was like, there was an organic egg farm in Cambodia. But then it doesn't make sense to be like otherwise a vegan restaurant and only serve eggs on the menu. But then I could, and then I could serve like bugs and spiders that they eat in Cambodia, which wasn't really that much into the insect cooking kind of things. So I was like, let's just make it vegan. And ever since then, I just stick to the vegan cooking. I actually love the challenge of it, to like think in a plant-based terms in cooking. I'm not vegan myself though. Like I eat like little meat here and there occasionally, but all my cooking that I do, I try to do vegan.
Yeah, I'm going to bounce around a little bit because I was curious. I read a blog that you wrote and you said that meat is a luxury, which I totally get and love that premise of you don't eat it all the time. I don't eat meat that often at home either. My wife and I eat a lot more vegetables, but you're from Slovakia. Maybe you could talk about what you mean by meat is a luxury and then sort of reconcile that with the national dish of Slovakia, which, if I'm pronouncing it right, is brinzové halsky, which I made the other night, which is freaking delicious. It's like a potato spätzle with bacon and scallions. It's really good. I didn't have that cheese, but we used some smoked feta. It's delicious, but the bacon was clearly a big part of it. So yeah, maybe talk a little bit about like what you mean by meat is a luxury, and do you even eat that dish anymore?
Yeah. Oh, when I say meat is a luxury, what I mean is that like we got so used to eat meat all the time. Like we have breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, for snacks. We eat it every day. We eat it in every meal. We go out to a restaurant. We eat meat. We eat steak. Like meat has to be the part of our day. And even at the coast, or even buying in a supermarket, like you are willing to buy the cheapest chicken or the cheapest beef just for the sake of having meat. And that is where it stops making sense for me. Like you are buying literally something such a bad quality that barely can label it as meat anymore in some cases, but still buying it and still eating it because you have to have the meat. Well, I would rather buy a bunch of organic carrots and have that instead, to be honest. And what I mean by that is that, like, like how often you eat caviar or how often you buy caviar for home, like, only not really, a special occasion or something. I rather limit my meat consumption to the best pieces, to the highest quality, the organic, when available and when I can afford it. I happily eat meat only a couple times a year or like rarely a couple times a month for some. If I can get my hands on a really good quality local organic piece of a meat product.
Yeah.
I exchange all my other cheap meat and all the other meat parts for a good quality vegetables and fruits and local ingredients. And I have my meat here and there.
Yeah.
That also means limiting the meat as part of the dishes, to not make the meat as a center of the dish. It doesn't have to be like steak and potatoes. You can cook like a vegetable-based meal and use a meat in a sauce and just like make a meat stock with it. You can make a little bit of meat or just like a meat garnish and the rest of the dish is vegetables. So that is also like limiting the meat, like the dish doesn't have to be all about the meat. To be honest, I never thought about that. The brinzové halušky dish of Slovakia, as that could never come up in a conversation. But that's a good one. Because I thought about it and I think it's actually a good example of what I just described. Because the bacon, by volume, is not a big part of the dish. And actually,
no.
To be honest, the brinzové halušky is the most common vegetarian dish on the menus in the restaurants. Oftentimes, it's the only vegetarian dish that you're going to find in the restaurant because the bacon is replaced by fried onions.
Yeah.
So they just do that cheap cheese and fried onions and sometimes some sauerkraut, and that's it. And that is actually like very commonly vegetarianized dish in here.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, and I bet if you like smoked the onions, then you get that smoky flavor.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was sort of a fun little teaser for you because I agree. We shouldn't be eating meat all the time, and it should be for special occasions. But there are things that just taste more delicious. And I'm sure in Slovakia, they're probably not getting the highest quality organic bacon all the time for that dish at home. I get the premise. Let's circle back. Most of what I want to talk about today is zero waste. I think that's why I wanted to have you on the pod is to talk about that. And so maybe just to get started, can you just define what zero waste means?
Well, zero waste, as long as in terms of food, zero food waste is any part of ingredient that is edible. So, for example, when you say food waste in a restaurant, an example, pineapple tops. Is it really food waste? It's not food waste from my point of view, from my work that I do, because there is nothing that you can do with the pineapple tops. It always will be wasted. And onion skins or garlic skins, very low nutritional value, very low amount by volume, very hard to upcycle. That is not something that I would consider valuable food waste, because there is not much that you can do with it. It's not really worth eating. But then there are things like excessive trimmings or potato peels and etc. that are fully edible, more nutritious than the main part of the ingredient, yet are still commonly wasted. Same, don't need to only talk about vegetables, that also applies for meat, like all the fatty parts of the meat that are trimmed and never even rendered for fat, only discarded and wasted. That is completely edible, that part of the animal. So that is food waste. What's not food waste for me is anything that doesn't have no nutritional value and is not edible at all. Mostly like skins and peels of tropical ingredients, like mango skin is not edible and pineapple skin, you're never gonna eat the pineapple skin. You can extract the flavor from it, but eventually it will always end up in the compost.
Yeah, absolutely. So I completely agree. I think I heard you mention that in your restaurant you were trying to not have a waste bin. Is that correct?
I didn't even have it though, like for a long time. I opened the restaurant without a bin, without any bin at all, with no compost, nothing. But that's how I opened the restaurant.
How did you go about that? It sounds like you were trying to work with all your purveyors to make sure that whatever they were delivering were things that you didn't have to throw in the trash.
Yeah, it took a lot of planning. To be completely honest, I almost completely drove myself crazy in that process. So there came a point when I had to agree to having a compost bin in the garden. I wasn't willing to compromise. For example, the pineapple is a good example because there's lots of pineapples in Cambodia. So the choice that I had to make was like, either I'm not going to use pineapples because it has an inedible part that I don't know what to do with, or I will use pineapple and I will just get over myself and have a compost bin in my garden. So it seems more sensible that I'm not hurting anything or anymore with having the compost bin in my garden, discarding inedible parts of the produce. So then I had that. I still did not have a bin for other waste though.
What did you do with like the boxes that things came in and the containers from spices?
There was no boxes, there was no spices. There was nothing. It was either made from scratch or I didn't have it.
Well, what about sugar? How did you get sugar?
I didn't use sugar.
What about salt?
Salt was in a paper boxes, so it went to compost. So anything in cardboard.
Got it.
There certainly were incidentals or unexpected, because waste will always happen at one point. It will creep up on you. There were cases when I ordered a bag of flour because the flour comes in a paper bag. Well, but when they delivered it, so it was like double wrapped in cling film and then in a plastic bag. So I'm like, okay, there we go. Then it happened very rarely, but when it did, I just took the waste at home to my apartment with me, and then it just went to the general waste from there. There wasn't anything else. Or in the cases when guests leave behind plastic bottles at the table, it was like, okay, like it happened, now whatever, I have to do something with it. But otherwise, there wasn't anything. I really made sure and took a great care of the fact there wasn't anything, any container, nothing coming into the restaurant that I had no place for.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I have a million questions about this. Like oil. How did you get oil into the restaurant or whatever fat you're cooking with?
Oil was in the glass bottles, and the glass bottles were collected in a local company that they were all crushed, basically.
Got it. Okay.
So by no means was that easy, and by no means I recommend or say that is possible at any part of the world for anyone in the restaurant. I have certainly went as far as I could, just also for challenging myself, and I can tell you that Cambodia wasn't the best place to do that, since there is like a big plastic obsession in Asia. So like they love plastic in everything and everywhere. I had to make lots of compromises in terms of not having products, of having to change dishes, or like having to look for different purveyors out of the two that was in the town. Like they're very, very extremely limited.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Vojtech, I'm kind of just pushing your buttons a bit to understand how far you go with zero waste. But what I love about your approach, and I want to talk about the book as well, because it's an incredible book called Surplus. But you create a lot of challenges for yourself that some might consider unnecessary. You opened a restaurant in Cambodia that was vegan, where you tried to have absolutely no trash in your entire restaurant. And restaurants are already incredibly hard. And so you create this box around what you do, which I have an affinity for. The more that we create sort of parameters, it actually allows us to be more creative because we have this box around us. So were you intentional in thinking about like creating these challenges for yourself? Or was that just sort of like organically happening because of the situation you were in?
That was all a careful planning over like 2 years period, approximately, for the restaurant. So I spent a lot of time in Cambodia, and pre-opening, I was still flying back and forth to Europe, Cambodia. I still had a full-time job in England at one point when I was like flying back to Cambodia just to make sure of finding all the distributors. And I would call the restaurant was kind of on the bit of an experimental side. There's certainly not something that I'm saying that everyone can do that anywhere in the world. I also went for everything, not only handmade, but even custom made, local made, and only looking for companies that are supporting the local communities, ideally locally owned, or being like this socially conscious and doing as much good as possible, including the furniture, the staff t-shirts that I'm wearing. I'm still wearing the staff t-shirts that we had in the restaurant because they are all made from a upcycled fabric that is from the larger industries in a capital that they are making the cheap t-shirts. So this is all the fabric that is being collected and remade into t-shirts, and they're like handmade, designed aprons, locally upcycled, all the furniture in the entire restaurant, and no chemicals whatsoever, like handmade, like coconut-based soaps and detergents. And the list goes on, and like banana papers, upcycled banana trees. And even when I was, because we've been like renovating the restaurant, so even like all the building waste that we collected from the restaurant was eventually ended up building a road in a village from it. I try to get in touch with as many people as possible, make as many contacts as possible to find as many products as possible in Cambodia, and like use only like pick the best of it and use that in the restaurant. Well, that part was mostly successful in that because there is lots of these initiatives and small companies that are doing these good locally handmade things. So I love that about Cambodia.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think I could replicate the same thing in Slovakia though, in all terms.
Well, I mean, look, I think what's so commendable about what you did and what you're still doing is, obviously you're making a lot of sacrifices to help the industry. You sort of went 10 kilometers so that most of the industry can go a meter, right? So I think you clearly went way above and beyond what anybody probably could do in general in terms of sustainability and mitigating waste and things. But I think you showed that I'm going to go 10 kilometers so that when you're just doing one small thing, it feels very, very tiny compared to what you're doing that's big. So I love that. I wanted to sort of chat about this really cool premise that you talked about. That it's funny because you talk about it through the lens of waste. You call it the black truffle mindset, and I think we can talk about what it means and essentially the idea of being as respectful to a carrot as you are to a black truffle. And you sort of talk about it through the lens of waste, which I think is really awesome. But I think it's also just an incredible sort of way to think about cooking in general, right? Because we tend to overcomplicate food a lot as chefs when we're cooking. Some of that is narcissistic. Some of it is just overcomplicating because we're not executing really well on one small thing. But digging deep into an ingredient is, for a lot of chefs, so much fun, right? And you can dissect. You could just take like fennel, for example, and I want to confit it, and I'll make some fennel oil with the tops, and I'll juice some of it, and maybe I'll sort of glaze something in that, or I'll burn some of the fennel tops and make a dust or something. You can obviously use some raw, and all these ways that I can use fennel. Yes, that is reducing waste, but also I think it's just a much better way of and a more enjoyable way of cooking, right? Because one, you can do so much with one ingredient and really dive deep into it and have a lot of fun and find all the ways in which that thing is versatile. And so many ingredients are that way. I think fennel always comes to mind because there's so much you can do with it, but there's tons. But you talk about this black truffle mindset through the lens of waste. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. You wrote a blog post on it, but maybe just sort of double click on it.
When you get black truffles in your kitchen, what do you do with it? You handle it carefully because, like, obviously it's expensive, it's black truffle, blah blah blah. Then you're gonna store it in a perfect conditions to make sure it lasts long, the quality is the best, and store it in a rice, store it in a container, have a special place, always careful around it, very mindful how you use it. And then it comes to you when you like start shaving it on a plate or something, then you like pick up all the crumbles, make sure all is on a plate, nothing's left on a pass. And like if there is any crumble, any broken pieces, then it goes into the sauce, goes into the oil, or goes somewhere. So bang, zero waste mindset. You have it. You know how to do it with one ingredient. Now, okay, there can be an argument, but the black truffle is very expensive, more expensive than the carrot, for example. Why should I do with carrots? Well, so a bunch of organic carrots, whatever their cost is, versus 2 little crumbs of black truffle, could be roughly the same. Now, how many carrots you go through in a kitchen and how many black truffle you go through in a kitchen in terms of volume and in terms of weight? You are like extensive trimming of the carrot and all the carrot peelings, and I don't know, like a little bit gone off or a little bit is moldy or something. Then now you're wasting all those high quality good carrots that are going in the bin, while you are very mindful about your black truffle. Now, financial wise, you are roughly wasting the same amount. Then would you ever like put in a bin a piece of a black truffle because it left in your hand and now you don't know what to do, now just chuck it in a bin? Like, I mean, no one does that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love it. And I hadn't ever thought of it through the lens of waste. And obviously that's a great way for you to sort of help people understand how to think about waste, but certainly even just through the lens of good cooking, I think it makes a ton of sense. So, I just have to ask, you're clearly like deep into this world of trying to reduce waste and be sustainable. And now you're teaching others and you're consulting. And how and why did you get so deep into this path of trying to reduce waste? Where does that come from?
I had the idea, I want to open a restaurant. And then when I got into all this kind of food waste lens, that I looked at the food right now, that I was like, okay, I open a restaurant, it must be zero waste. So I did that. When I opened the restaurant, and I've seen like, damn, like that works. And it's like so financially viable, like so much. And it makes so much sense to use like 100% or like 95% of all the ingredients. That to me, it was like this discovery, like, oh my God, like I have to tell everyone. Like how do we not do that as standard? How are we wasting so much food? I've seen crazy stuff like 100 kilo of edible food in a bin being carried out into the general bin at the end of the night from the restaurant. Now, that's like $500 a night or something. Well, why would you do that? And why would you waste like so much food? Like there is so much food waste happens throughout the entire chain of the food system. And we as chefs have so much authority and so much say in that. We can lead because we are connected also to the consumers, to the people who come to a restaurant, who eat our food, and also the ones that grow our food, to the farmers and to the distributors. So we can influence both sides. And then it just always made me wonder, like, why is not everyone doing that? You don't have to go completely mental with food waste like I did in Cambodia, that like absolutely everything has to be done. But even if you would only do like 50% reduction, it's so significant. It's such a big change that you can do it with that. And to me, it's just like this, it doesn't make sense because the waste happens in every industry, basically. Like everyone wastes something. And that's why we are now looking at a circular economy and other things. Another example that I would tell you, like if you run on an Apple shop, and are you going to throw away like 2 or 3 iPhones at the end of the day? Because like, yeah, whatever, I couldn't sell those, so put them in a bin. You know, like that's the product that you're selling that brings you the profit. The food is the product that you're selling and brings you the profit.
Yeah, absolutely. This podcast is brought to you by Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Meez is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmeez.com. So the genesis of you getting into this sounds like it was really just you realized that there was a huge cost savings and you just sort of dug really deep in from there.
I always had this mindset and everything. I just question everything. Like when I was looking at the bin, and you just like see chefs like peeling carrots and like bang, I'm like trimming the leeks and like trim away like 10 centimeters. So that's for no reason. Like, at the end, extra 5 centimeters. Like now, copy paste, like repeat that on a 10 kilo crate of leeks. And you have like 2 kilo of edible, perfectly nice leeks in the bin for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And or like here's a puree left in my bowl because I'm scraping it with a metal spoon, so it doesn't count. So why don't you use a silicone spatula? You know, like,
Oh God, yeah.
you don't do it one time. It's not one bowl. It's not one occasion. You repeat that throughout the day, every day in your operation. Now, how much money is that at the end of the year?
Absolutely. And I mean, my biggest pet peeve is when people cut the scallions and they leave like that half inch or quarter inch of the white left. And I'm like, what are you doing? 100 cases of scallions a year, you just threw out 4 cases of scallions. So I totally get that premise. And I'm so stoked that you're helping more and more people understand this and get the word out. I've seen you go real deep with this though, in terms of like the things that you do to reduce waste. And I want to talk about some of the techniques that you use and how you've sort of repurposed food that we might not think of being able to repurpose. But, when we're doing the math, right, let's just say the average restaurant in America maybe does $1 million a year in revenue. And let's just say that they spend $300,000 on food, right? So their COGS is $300,000 and 10% of that, it gets wasted, right? So that's $30,000 a year that they're wasting. I'm curious how you think about the labor cost outside of, just making sure that you're doing things properly, right? Like not cutting off the last half inch of the scallions and making sure you're using all the leeks. But when you start to repurpose things, and that takes labor dollars, right? To then go and make those extra things, probably takes specific types of cuisine to use some of the ways in which you repurpose them. Because you do a lot of consulting now. How do you think about the labor dollars related to that? Let's just say that you were going to waste $30,000 in food, but one employee maybe costs you $50,000 for the year. How do you think about balancing the two of those things?
There is no labor cost food waste reduction. The problem with that whole approach that currently the industry has with the approach to food waste is that everyone thinks in terms of food waste like something that you have to reduce once it happens. Now that is the problem. That is when there is a labor cost. Because if your sous chef or chef de partie is in charge of reducing the food waste because, oh my god, now I trimmed something, or I can't trim it, or like I have to upcycle this, then it's a problem. There is extra time and extra work. The food waste doesn't happen when it's on your chopping board. The food waste happens when the menu is being written. That's when you create the food waste. When you write the menu and, I don't know, leeks, carrots, something comes up, you already know how you're going to process that ingredient in your menu and what the byproduct will be. You have to incorporate that byproduct in a circular way back either into the same dish, in the same menu, or in a different, in case of hotels, for a different outlet, different restaurant. But the waste or the byproduct has to find its place when you're writing the menu. It is not the responsibility of the chef de parties or the line cooks to upcycle your items. And at that point, when the upcycled item or the whatever new item that you're doing becomes an essential part of your dish, of the menu, then it's basically it's not an extra work anymore because you need it. Like whether you're gonna make pickled cucumbers or you're gonna replace the pickled cucumbers with a pickled cauliflower leaves, maybe. Because if you're doing a sandwich, then maybe you can do that. That's just an example. Then you don't have to do the pickled cucumbers anymore. You will be pickling cauliflower leaves. It takes the same amount of time and the same amount of work than doing the cucumber, for example. And that is something that most of that can be replicated. So doing new items or extra items is never a good approach because then you might end up building a huge larder that you're never going to use. And you're just going to throw out 6 months later again. So you have to know what you're going to do with that waste product at the moment that you are creating that waste. It has to go somewhere sensibly, ideally at a place where you can sell it with a margin, so on a customer's plate. Because, okay, like staff food is great because there is still some cost associated with staff food. So if you can feed it to staff, there is still win. But the number one solution or the number one ambition should always to put it on the consumer's plate. Majority of my work is around that, basically. Reduce the food waste when you create the dish.
That's really interesting. I think we both come from the same world of fine dining, and I've also sort of been in the fast casual world and scaled restaurants, things like that. And I think about this makes a ton of sense in fine dining, but how do you sort of apply this to some of the more simpler concepts? But it's a really interesting premise you just said where like you might just be changing the paradigm of how you think about what goes on that sandwich, for example, and maybe we're not putting pickled cucumbers anymore. We're just not using cucumbers because we already use cauliflower and we pickle the leaves instead. And to your point, it's the same amount of work and now just a different ingredient. I really love that. I didn't really get that from the surface level thinking through your methodologies. That's really interesting. It sounds like that must be a big part of how you're consulting with these kitchens as well, just thinking through the menu.
Yeah, the funny thing is I have zero fine dining clients on any upscale. Usually those restaurants, they know how to do it. The 99% of the clients are all these casual, large scale, and it's very simplistic food canteens and etc.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think I had a misconception going into this about how you were approaching this. Maybe could you talk a bit about some of those things that you do, some of that repurposing that you do? You mentioned cauliflower leaves, right? So maybe like there's a sandwich where there's some ham for people that eat meat, and it used to be pickled cucumbers and now it's pickled cauliflower leaves. But what are some of the other sort of tactics that you use that have worked well for some of these restaurants?
Number one is usually, it still surprises me after all the years that I'm doing this, is amount of trimmings that chefs trim the produce. It still surprises me. Like, why do we trim such a huge amount of the ingredients and the vegetables off? So it's always like trim less is one of the things, and then peel less. There is so many things that you don't need to peel. Mostly root vegetables don't need to peel. Depends on the use. There is some cases that you have to simply. Well, there is so many cases where you don't have to peel the vegetables.
What's an example there?
Roasted carrots. Yeah, you don't have to do that. If you are doing grated carrots, you can just grate it with the skin. You won't even notice that. Potatoes, basically, if you do anything else than pureed potatoes, then just leave the skin on as well and just work it into it. Or even heck, like peel it. Doesn't matter. The potato peel is like 3 times tastier than the potato itself. I regularly eat potato peels at home. We all love it.
Yeah.
Then there is like lots of stalks and these leaves, or like cauliflower stalk and the broccoli stalk. Like the broccoli stalk. So now you look at the broccoli, like what percentage is the florets and what percentage is the stalk. So like there you go, like broccoli stalk coleslaw. That's as simple as it gets. There is nothing special about that. Just throw it, put it in a grater, and then now you have a coleslaw from a broccoli stalk. Same cauliflower leaves. Just use it in the same way like you use the cabbage.
One thing that's apparent, I think, in thinking about that approach is you have to have pretty impeccably fresh ingredients to do that as well, right? Like, so broccoli, I love the broccoli stems. Took my wife 3 years for her to start eating the broccoli stems. I would make it and she would take those out and only eat the florets, but finally she does. But if you have broccoli that's not fresh, that is a really woody stem, like pretty much inedible. And you got to kind of trim off a bunch of it because it's like eating wood. Same thing with like asparagus and things like that. So I imagine part of what you're doing with these restaurants is just helping them source better because you can't use commodity asparagus or broccoli and achieve this.
I always say that what zero waste thing is always about maximizing the flavor and the quality and not the other way around. You should never compromise the quality, the flavor, and the safety of the food for the sake of reducing waste. So obviously when you have like yellow cauliflower leaves, that is bin. You're not even trying to save that. Why would you feed or eat anyone with yellow cauliflower leaves or like these ugly black broccoli stems? But then you can tell that there is something wrong with that broccoli already if it's gone black. So probably not a good idea to use it anyway. Never use anything that you don't feel safe about or doesn't even look good. There is sometimes I get these ugly potatoes that are all beaten up and black. So I mean, you're not gonna use those peels. It's okay. Like there is always gonna be some waste, and it's always you need to think about like you're prioritizing the flavor and the quality and the safety, you're feeding the public.
Yeah.
So it's never for the sake of those other things. Like in the first place, what we're cooking has to be delicious. Because otherwise there is no point that if I present you with a zero waste dish that doesn't taste good, then that is certainly not helping.
I'd love to hear maybe like an example of like a dish you helped one of your clients, something that we're used to eating that you changed by using this process.
It's not so much about changing a particular dish, it's more about looking at the byproduct of the dish and where the byproduct can go. Let's just go back to the cauliflower because it's a good example and it has a large amount of waste by default, basically. You make a cauliflower gratin, but you're not utilizing the cauliflower leaves because you don't know what where. So there is always like this 40%, it's actually 40% of the weight of the cauliflower, the leaves goes to the bin. But you are doing, call it a side salad. Well, it was a self-help restaurant, where it was just like big balls and presented out. So like there was a croissant, there was salads, and there was like a couple other items and etc. stuff. So now the restaurant was buying white cabbage and lettuce and other ingredients to make a salad with it. Now the cabbage wasn't used anywhere else, only for that salad, and you was wasting cauliflower leaves. So that was like obvious in the first minute for me. Like that is something that you can change right away on the spot. Like from tomorrow, the cabbage don't need to be ordered. You can just go with the cauliflower leaves because you have more than enough cauliflower leaves to change the cabbage in the salad. These are the things that you can change on the spot. Basically, there is not much thinking has to go around because it's like so simple. Making crumbles or like crumble for a dish for a topping. Now you order the ingredients for that, like seeds and nuts, and then you blend it and then you toast it, roast it. So you have this like the nutty crumble for something to sprinkle on something. Or you can take potato peels and roast them with spices and blend them down, and then you have the same crumble, if not even more tasty. Those are these immediate quick fixes.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about your book for a little bit? Because that's obviously a lot of what we're talking about here is in the book. When did it publish? And what do you hope that people get out of this book? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on how it's been since you published it.
Book's been out since 2021, February. It's actually been 2 years now. I expected like 2 sales. My girlfriend and my mom will buy it. We had very, very, very good sales for me being completely unknown, a new author, first book, independently published without any publisher behind my back. Sold thousands of copies as of now. And companies buying it in bulk and distributing it for the chefs and the clients. And that is kind of the goal of the book, to make sure that it gets into the hand to chefs and to as many as possible. And it's a perfect way when a company distributes it for their staff, for their chefs, because it comes from their authority, their seniors, and it gets to their hand. So that is the end goal of the book. The book can only have so many pages to avoid like having 1,000 pages. That is definitely not everything in the book. The book is like the starting point to have this kind of open mind and like to change the mindset and to offer a different view, like the things can be done differently. It's not about giving you a complete solution and like tell you everything about that, but it's about this like opening the mind and like the first point of access to like the food waste reduction.
Yeah, it's incredible. You're going to be gifting some to my team as well.
Good.
It's a really great book. Are you thinking about another book?
Thinking is the correct word.
How do you think about sort of like the viability of this zero waste approach becoming ubiquitous in the food industry?
It will have to at one point. If you are wasting food and then you go bankrupt, I don't even feel sorry for you. I'm sorry. I mean, come on. Like you're doing business and you're wasting the main product that you're selling. So you go bankrupt, there is no reason to cry for that. You have to adapt. I mean, look at the state of the world that we are in now. Look at the state of the industry. What is everyone doing? Like the food waste trend is so huge, and I don't dare to call it a trend because I hope it's not a trend, that it's something will become a standard, which is the intention of my work, to make this something normal. So we don't have to call it like, oh, this is a zero waste restaurant, because there won't be a reason to mention that or highlight that point, because everyone would be like kind of zero waste or like having these waste reduction initiatives. That is something where I would like to see that.
Yeah. Well, there's only one Vojtech, and you can only be in so many places. How do you recommend people like start working on this if they're not working with you? Especially, it sounds like you're working with a lot of sort of like casual restaurants. And I think this is probably a huge value prop for them. How can they get started if they don't have access to you? Obviously, reading the book is one way. Is there anything else that you recommend? And also, is there like infrastructure or things that you think are good ways to start?
There is no one size fits all solution. So what I recommend to one restaurant will most likely not work for the next one. So book is always a good place to start, but in general, is having that mindset of questioning everything. Like, do I really have to do things the way I'm doing it? Do I really have to process the vegetables the way I'm doing it? Like, can I really not do that? There is so much that goes down to planning. It's really about focusing on the planning. Like, 80% planning, 20% executing. Basically, it's all about the kind of mise en place that you do in the kitchen, and it's especially this is the responsibility of the executive chefs or whoever is in charge of creating the dishes and the menus. So you should never blame your chef de partie or sous chef or the level ranking chefs for creating waste, because it's the responsibility of the person who wrote that dish. The cauliflower didn't decide that the leaves gonna be wasted. The chef de partie didn't decide that the leaves gonna be wasted. It's the person who put the cauliflower gratin on the menu and didn't utilize the leaves. That person decided that leaves gonna be wasted. So you have to look at the right place of like who's sitting in the office, who's writing those words and the dishes on the menu, and that's the person who has to think about that.
Yeah, it's certainly a mindset shift. Are there chefs that you see that are doing this really well, or just generally any mentors or people that inspire you in the industry?
A lot, yeah. Douglas McMaster, Silo in London, the first zero waste restaurant in the world. I spent a month working with them back when they were still in Brighton. That was a huge push and a huge eye-opening experience for me, and I'm sure for everyone else. Yeah, I dined with them the other day in London too.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, what comes to my mind is Adam Handling, also in London. Very nice zero waste, one Michelin star restaurant. I love that kind of food because it doesn't scream zero waste at the first sight. You don't see that. And it's just like so beautiful and pretty. What goes on behind the scenes is like nice zero waste done. And I'm sure that there is many others that not come to my mind. Oh, Matthew Orlando just closed the Amas in Copenhagen. So a huge zero waste initiative in there for sure.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for sharing those. I asked this question of myself, and then I've been asking it to guests. If there was no construct of time and you had unlimited resources, meaning something that you did that might take 100 years, you could do in a day, and if it took $100 million, you could still do it. What would you do next?
I used almost exactly the same words the other day when I was speaking to my partner, that if I would have an unlimited amount of time, that this is what I would do. Now, I can't say what I said because it's a potential business idea for next, but, but it's like the next thing. But what I would certainly do is I would love to have a bunch of restaurants around the world in different cities and to bring that into the local communities. So like opening a cluster of restaurants here and there and being really community-focused places that helps the local communities, uses local products, supports all local initiatives while being profitable because we are not wasting any food and like all these good win-win-win kind of thing that like ticks all the boxes. That is certainly one of the things that I would go for.
Very cool, man. Okay, we're going to wrap up here, but I think you saw I want to do a little food challenge with you. Although after speaking with you, I'm only going to do a few of these. But are you up for it?
Yeah, tell me.
Okay, cool. I'm going to list a couple things, ingredients or sort of byproducts, and I want you to come up with some innovative, sort of delicious ways that you would use these up. And the curveball being that we can't create any standalone powders or chips or purees. You could turn them into a dish, but we won't say like, oh, I'll make a powder out of this kid. And I think I'm not going to use, well, I'll say it. This one, now that we've spoken, I think this might be a bad example. But the leftover vegetables from a brine, like from brining, like a ham or a turkey or something.
When we used to do that, we always put those vegetables under the ham or the turkey when you're baking it. So you take all those vegetables, you put it in a tray, and then you put your meat on it, and then you make the kind of demi-glace or the sauce
Gotcha.
from that vegetables that are at the bottom of the tray.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And how about the vegetables from like a stock, whether the mirepoix or if you're making like a mushroom stock or something?
Blend it down, put it through. You know what? Add some spicy seed, add some mustard seed, a pinch of agar-agar or gelatin, turn it into a pate.
Nice. All right, cool. The dark green of a leek.
Most likely can be used at the same place where the other part of the leek was used. If not, made for a beautiful oil. And to take it a step further, you can chargill those green tops and then make an oil from it.
Yeah, nice. I like that. Okay, the whey from feta.
I would probably use it for brining other ingredients like vegetables. I did the other day a brined lettuce in a sauerkraut juice. So I could probably pull off the same thing with a feta juice, the brine. Or like brine the vegetables and like so maybe that thing should have active bacteria in it. So if it does, then you can use it for starting the ferment or fermenting vegetables in that brine.
I like it. All right. Okay, we're gonna stop there. That was awesome. Great, man. Well, Vojtech, this was great, man. I'm glad we could catch up. And congrats on all the success. And thank you for doing what you do to help the industry learn more about wasting less. And I hope you continue doing what you do. So thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was good to chat.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning into the Meez podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmeez.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.